It is my distinct pleasure to introduce this next panel, speaking on the topic, "And God Created Them Male and Female, SB-14 and Protecting Kids from Gender Transition." The first member of our distinguished panel is Dr. Tom Oliverson, who represents Texas House District 130. He is a medical doctor and the House author of Senate Bill 14. The second member of our panel is Joseph Combe, the Director of Public Policy at the Family Policy Alliance and a U.S. Army veteran. He has previously worked in anti-trafficking efforts. The third member of this panel is Jonathan Covey, the Director of Policy at Texas Values, who's a lawyer. He received his law degree from Oak Brook Law School. Please welcome our next panel.
Thank you, William. Appreciate the introductions. It's great to be with you all this afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great. Well, it's a pleasure to be able to be here with Dr. Representative Tom Oliverson and my good friend Joseph Combe from Family Policy Alliance, talking to you about the issue of protecting kids from gender transition surgeries, procedures, and treatments. I guess, Dr. Oliverson, I guess the best place to start on an issue this big is just to kind of start at the beginning, right? So tell us a little bit, I'll start with you. Talk a little bit about yourself and kind of what got you into public service in the first place. And you're a state representative here for House District 130, which is Tomball and Cypress area, so.
That's right.
Yeah.
Is this working? Ah, look at that, cool. Yep. Hello, Texas Values friends. It's great to be with you today. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out as part of my bio that I'm very proud of the fact that this is my third, I think, consecutive Texas Values Summit here in Austin, and just very grateful to this church for opening their doors to us, and just so honored to be with you. So I am one of those folks that comes knocking on your door. For those of you that are primary voters, precinct chairs, I'm one of those candidates that comes knocking on your door in the dead heat of the summer, wearing a suit, sweating to death, never having run for public office before, but really feeling like God has kind of put it on his heart to stand up and serve his community. And in fact, I never really wanted to run for office because my observation was that unfortunately a lot of times the people we elect to public office are there really to serve themselves as opposed to serve their fellows. And in fact, interestingly enough, Alexander Hamilton even wrote about that. So this is not a new problem. We think corruption, we think, gosh, these self-serving politicians, that's not a new problem, right? Alexander Hamilton was writing about that literally a year or two after the signing of the Declaration, of the Constitution. So this is not a new problem. But anyway, I had no previous political experience. I just had a strong calling, a servant's heart, and a strong desire to stand up and to just see if I could, just serve in the most honest and God-honoring capacity that I could. So I remember it was one of these things where I remember praying very clearly to God. I said, I don't know if this is what you want me to do, God, but I'm willing to do it. If it is, I'll serve. I'll run for office. I'll serve you by serving others, but send me a sign if this is what you want. And some of you know when you ask God to send you a sign, that you just up the ante, right? Because you might very well get an answer. And so my state representative announced he was not running for re-election and he was running for sheriff instead, very shortly after I prayed that. And so I called my wife. I said, I think we're going to do this. We prayed about it, and then the rest, as they say, is history. So I feel very blessed to represent the people of Cypress and Tomball. I've sort of made honesty and integrity my cornerstones of public service. I don't need to do this job. I'm not doing this because I need to feel important. I'm a doctor in my day job. I make good money. I put people to sleep. I don't have to be in office to put people to sleep. I do that every day. So, but I'm here because I feel like this is where God needs me. This is where God wants me. And I've seen him literally use me to do some really incredible things. And for those of you that have been in that situation, you know when God uses you, and you know for a fact God has used you to do something good. I remember calling my good friend Brian Hughes after last session, because we had this bill called the National Motto Act, and I said, Brian, do you realize that God has used us to put his name back in every public school in this state? And doesn't that feel good?
Amen. Well, we know you represented your constituents very well, and you honor the name of God above everything else, and we appreciate that about you. You also helped work on this piece of legislation that we're going to be talking about, Senate Bill 14. You were the House sponsor of this legislation, which turned out to be probably one of the most controversial issues during the 88th regular session, which has really been fantastic, though, in terms of protecting kids. Joseph, I want to give you a quick chance here, too, as well. You know, you're Director of Public Policy for Family Policy Alliance. You're a Director of Policy for an organization that literally has the word policy in its name, and a U.S. Army veteran as well. Tell us a little bit how you kind of got into this arena as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Jonathan. By the way, thank you also for the honor it is to be here at the Faith and Family Forum. I've really been looking forward to this, and this is a great group, so I'm just honored to partner with Texas Values any chance I get. But you're right, I am an attorney. I'm an Army veteran. After I left active duty service a few years ago, I knew I wanted to do something a little bit different. Family law was really my wheelhouse area of legal practice, so I just followed God's call and was connected to Family Policy Alliance. We're a national pro-family organization that originally grew out of the focus on the family. And we're really honored in that we get to host this network of what we call state family policy councils. And Texas Values is one of these. They are the state FPC for Texas. And we get to partner with them and work with them on policy initiatives and campaigns every year, among other things. And it's a real privilege. And the way we really got into this issue was through what we call our Help Not Harm campaign. Back in 2017, we drafted the original version of what we call our Help Not Harm model bill. It's a piece of model legislation that it prohibits these sort of gender transition procedures on minors, and then provides some method of recourse for them as for the victims to really sue to get something back, some damages. We began that in 2017. The first version of it was officially passed in Arkansas in 2021, led by the great State Representative Robin Lundstrom there. They overrode their governor, who at the time was a Republican. He's actually running for president right now. We had to override a Republican governor to do that, and since then we've seen, we're up to 20 states now, which I know we'll show that a little bit later, but I'll just intro that for now. That's how FPA and how, therefore, I got into this issue area.
Well, yeah, that's great. Well, you know, you're talking about a little bit about this. You started getting into this this idea, but with every legislative solution, with everything that comes down the road in terms of a legislative solution, you see, it's a response to a problem, of course, right? So with kind of giving us the bigger picture, more of the nationwide picture of some of this, what is the problem that we've been working to solve, and that Senate Bill 14 came along to help solve? And I guess one of the things that a lot of people don't know is you were talking about this model legislation. Model legislation doesn't necessarily it may take a particular form, but different states may use it in different ways, right? So SB-14 had a component of some of this model legislation as well.
Yes, absolutely. So the model legislation doesn't mean that each state passes it word for word, like you said. It just means that it's something that states can base their own legislation off of. And even you, Representative, parts of SB-14 are based off and parts are not. And that's what's right for Texas. Because at the end of the day, we exist to serve the states and the FPCs and the legislators within those states. They know what's best for their states. So we exist to serve there. So you're absolutely right. The problem we saw being addressed was really what I like to say is just another evolution of what began the sexual revolution back in the 60s, which was a spectacular distortion of human beings' sexual nature. And this is one of the next evolutions of that, this idea that someone can be not just transgender, but transhuman overall. Transgender is the most mainstream version of it right now, but you'll find stories of people being trans age or transracial. And in this case, the mainstream one is transsexual or transgender. Transsexual is the antiquated term now that we used to call this. And the specific problem of that was it being done to minors, perpetrated on children who cannot consent. By definition, anyone who's a minor under the legal age of majority cannot consent to life-altering procedures. But this was being done, and not just in old-fashioned traditional gender dysphoria, which is defined as a discomfort with one's sex as they were born, but also what we would call rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is more of a peer pressure-like craze of people, of young children, especially young women, young ladies, who just don't want to be women, basically. It's not typical gender dysphoria, but it is pushing them towards these radical, life-altering decisions.
Yeah, and with that background, Representative Alverson, so you were very disciplined. We were talking about this a little while ago in the back. You were very disciplined about, here in Texas, making this about the medical science. And we've had this discussion before where we talked about gender dysphoria is a mental thing. And it doesn't have physical elements or properties because there's nothing physical to fix. Talk a little bit about the medical science behind some of this for us.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So, gender transitioning per se in adults had been going on for quite some time. I think back to probably the late 70s, early 80s. But in I think it was the early 2000s or the late 90s, the Dutch came across this idea. They said, the whole business of people transitioning doesn't really seem to be addressing their psychological issues, their depression, their dysphoria. And so maybe the reason is because we're not transitioning them early enough. I don't know how they hit on that, but that was essentially the thing. And so what they did is they did a series of what we would consider to be novel experiments where they had a small patient population and they said, well, we're going to start at a younger age. We're going to identify kids that are uncomfortable with their sex assigned at birth, and we're going to see if we transition them to the opposite gender, if that's going to solve all their problems. And then we went from that literally to a worldwide phenomena in a matter of years where essentially without any randomized controlled trials or the benefit of any really good legitimate science, this just essentially went from being an experiment where, hey, we're going to try something out to, hey, this is standard of care. You should just be doing this. Don't question it. And it's very typical leftism in the way that the scientific community approached it from a standpoint of, once it was established, you couldn't question it, you couldn't dispute it, you couldn't ask questions. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatrics, which finally this year has decided to go back and look at the science on this because they have just been under incredible pressure from their own membership, pediatricians. They actually suppressed last year an attempt by their own membership to start a discussion at their annual meeting by their members in the House of Delegates about whether their position was supportive of the science. The board of directors refused to allow the membership to even have the conversation. And so that's the background for which we come into this conversation, and I think the reason why we picked two doctors to carry this, because the reality is that the science never really supported what they were doing. They said, we should do this because it will help resolve gender dysphoria. Well, guess what? It doesn't. And the original studies didn't prove that, and the subsequent studies that they've done, as low quality science as it is, doesn't prove that either. They said that this would lower the risk of suicide, that this would help children not commit suicide out of, not feeling good about themselves. Guess what? No difference. Even in the original studies, when you go back and look at them, no difference. So that's where we came into this, and that's why we sort of took the tack that we took, is the science was on our side here, not on their side. We just had to get people to look at it.
European countries have been ahead of us on this, I guess, the entire time. I mean, and now we're seeing that they're saying, and there's a study by in Finland and some other studies that are talking about how this is actually becoming harmful, and this has harmful effects. We don't see that here in the United States so much because the American Medical Association and some of these medical associations have become politicized. Joseph, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jonathan. We have a document that we distribute to our allies in the legislatures, and then and in a state FPC is called an issue brief, where we talk about what's going on in the rest of the world, especially in Europe. And it's really astounding, Jonathan, because I'm an ardent patriot. I love America. It's why I joined the Army. It's why I do this job. And this issue is another layer of tragedy to it, because it's the first time in my life I can remember where America is leading the way in exporting bad ideas. Usually it's America who's always exporting the good ideas. We're actually exporting the bad ones now. And the Europeans are ahead of us in every sense of the term, this, for a change. It's been the first time in my life where we could say that about something this significant and impactful. They're ahead of us on the science and even on the administration of it, the research and data, and unfortunately that puts them ahead of us on the morality of this issue too. Because this panel is called He Made the Man and Woman, made the man and woman, right? We know as Christians, that God only makes someone as a male or a female. So the Europeans are ahead of us even morally here. It's astounding. And it's now England, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and France are all pulling the plug on this in some capacity, which is astounding if you understand how liberal the institutions are in those countries.
We saw as SB-14 was being implemented, and I want to talk about the lawsuit here in a little while, but we saw as it was being implemented just mere weeks ago that there were some hospitals that started saying they would no longer be offering these treatments. Texas Children's Hospital, Dell Children's Hospital here in Austin, and then we've seen across the country, in Boston, the Boston Children's Hospital and some of the other ones. Vanderbilt as well. What's the motive for them doing this in the first place? What are they getting out of this?
Well, I would say, at least in the state of Texas, I hope the motivation is that they know that those doctors are fixing to lose their licenses if they keep doing it. And so, I want to be really clear that the mechanism of action for SB-14 is that both the medical board and the Attorney General's office have the ability to investigate, but ultimately the medical board will permanently and for all time take away a doctor's license for doing this.
And I guess what I was getting at as well is, what before this law, and as they're doing this, as they're providing these treatments, what is the potential profit motive there? Oh,
it's huge. And in fact, we, go back to 2021, we had a similar bill filed by our good friend Matt Krause, and I was his joint author on that bill, and heard it in committee. And it was just one of those where, you just kept peeling the onion layers back in the testimony on the bill, and you realized there's something wrong here. Come to find out that the doctor that perjured herself in front of all of us was working for a taxpayer-funded public hospital medical school in Dallas, doing this to kids. But yeah, there's a tremendous amount of money to be made, because I'll tell you what's interesting, and maybe later we'll talk about some things that, work still to be done. But one of the things that's fascinating about this is because corporate America has become so afraid of wokeism and they literally just cave, that our medical insurance companies just have completely caved on this. And so all of this transitional stuff, even the really expensive surgeries, is totally paid for by insurance. And so it is quite lucrative. Yeah, there's definitely a profit margin. Plus they get to act like, they're, oh, look at us, we're taking care of kids. You uneducated conservatives out there, you just hate people, and we're taking care of people. So there's that psychological thing too.
I just want to add 10 seconds. So the Daily Wire did an expose on the Vanderbilt Hospital and uncovered them admitting this openly, how lucrative these procedures were. It's between $70,000 and $1 million total to transition someone starting under the age of 18. And Vanderbilt admitted this on tape. Daily Wire's got the receipts. If you want to look it up, you can. It's quite appalling. But they basically say, this is a moneymaker for us, and if you have moral objections, there's the door. And additionally, in the vein of how Representative Alverson immediately interpreted that question, these bills are causing people to shut their doors for the licensure and also for the liability of the exposed system too. Just this week, Washington Hospital in St. Louis, who there was a big whistleblower out of there named Jamie Reed. She's courageous because she actually identifies as transgender, and she's blowing the whistle on this. They announced they were closing their clinic, and their direct quote in their statement was that the Help Not Harm law passed in Missouri exposes their physicians to unacceptable levels of legal and financial liability. Thank you.
Amen.
So we've laid out the problem. Texas, this past session, and you led this effort, Representative Oliverson, along with Senator Donna Campbell, who's also an ER physician. Give her an applause. She's tied up right now, but we wish she could be here. We saved a seat for her right there. We have this law now. Talk a little bit about what it does and some of the safeguards we put in place to make sure that this continues and doesn't get struck down by the courts.
Perfect. So a couple of main things that it does. First of all, it makes the giving of drugs for the purposes of transitioning a child's gender or treating gender dysphoria per se, and the doing of surgeries to change gender, that now becomes outlawed under the Medical Practice Act in Texas. So any physician or nurse practitioner, anybody that's engaging in that, is now essentially in violation and subject to disciplinary action. And we explicitly prescribe that there's only one punishment that's acceptable, and that's immediate termination, permanent termination of licensure. I will point out that we put a couple of interesting twists into the bill. You may have noticed that it says healthcare provider when it says these are prohibited things. So talking about giving drugs, talking about doing surgery, it uses the term healthcare provider, which is a lot broader than just physician, right? That could be pharmacists, that could be nurse practitioners. We really try to make sure that there's no sort of rabbit hole for them to go down, and a Planned Parenthood will find a way around, right? So shut that down. The second thing it does is it allows the Attorney General to have separate enforcement powers in terms of starting an investigation. And the reason we did that is because the medical board actually works by referral. And this is really important. If you get nothing else out of this, hear what I'm about to say. The medical board depends on anonymous complaints against physicians followed by an investigation to determine wrongdoing, which means that if there's a gender clinic down the street from you and you know that's a gender clinic and you know kids are being harmed and you know they're breaking the law and you don't say anything, it will go on. So if you know it's happening, turn those doctors in, let the medical board investigate. The other thing it does is it completely shuts off any and all financial compensation. Not only does it say Medicaid can't pay for this, no state dollars for this, it goes one step further and it says that no entity doing business with the state of Texas can use either directly or indirectly state dollars to support these treatments. And I say that to you because when the Chamber of Commerce folks caught on to that, some of the big tech corporations that work here in Austin caught on to that, they quietly came to our office and begged and pleaded for that to be changed. And their argument was, well, in California, we may be forced to do these procedures and blah, blah, blah. And, we have a state contract to provide computers and woe is me, what are we supposed to do? And I just said to them, you run your own insurance. You're federally preempted under federal law. You don't have to comply with any state law in terms of providing something. But we are, in fact, telling you don't provide it here. So, yeah, if you want to keep your contract, stop providing these treatments here or elsewhere. So those are some of the big things that it does.
Joseph, you and I talked more than once as we were going through this process, and occasionally I would call you and would say, okay, well, this is what's happening, and you gave me some feedback as well, but just kind of talk about your perspective a little bit as we were going through this here in Texas, and especially since I know you were juggling other states at the time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a pleasure to work with Texas Values, especially you, Jonathan. I so enjoy it.
I set you up for that one.
Yeah,
right?
I know. But I do mean it because I get to work with a lot of different legislators and people in allied organizations, and I love any chance I get to work in the Lone Star State. Especially, it was fun to work with you guys alongside all these other states we were helping along with it, because it helped me grow as an advocate too, in understanding the different needs, what was best for different states in terms of how to solve this problem. because there are some differences amongst, you'll see later, there were 17 bills that attacked this issue that were passed this year that we collectively loop under our Help Not Harm campaign. They're not all the same. They're actually very different. They're all so well tailored to their individual states. And everything Representative Oliverson just told you right now is reflective of really the legislative and tactical brilliancy of how they tailored this bill to the specific problem in Texas. And that's what I really enjoyed the most, is going back and forth with Jonathan, and then when I got to meet Representative Oliverson about what was best for here and how we just make it fit to tailor it exactly what's going on in Texas. That was the most enjoyable and rewarding part of it to me.
Thank you. So we had, and this is something we were expecting, but of course most legislation in Texas goes into effect on September 1st. The September 1st following the end of the legislative session. So we, of course, were expecting some sort of legal challenge to this legislation. We got that recently, last month, when we had a number of organizations, some doctors, and some families with transgender kids file lawsuits in state court here in Travis County against this bill to try to prevent it from going into effect. And here in Texas, we have a special rule that the Attorney General's office can use. So when someone files suit in a state court, and the state loses, then the state has the option of filing what's called an interlocutory appeal directly to the Texas Supreme Court. So when the district judge here in Travis County ruled against us, a liberal district judge, of course, then we saw the Attorney General's office file an appeal directly to the Texas Supreme Court, and it automatically puts a stay. It automatically pauses that district judge's order, meaning the law can continue to go into effect. And that's what we've seen here, right? So we saw the Texas Supreme Court, they denied a special appeal by these plaintiffs to put a pause on this, letting this law go into effect. But one of the arguments that these plaintiffs made came, and you and I were talking about this, Joseph. I thought it was very interesting. But as a lawyer yourself, making the argument that this is a parental rights issue, making the argument that you're taking away from the parents' freedom by not allowing them to make that choice. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's so important to bring this up, because it's becoming one of the left's favorite arguments against us on this issue. They think it's a gotcha moment for us because we're all parental rights groups, like Texas Values and Family Policy Alliance are large proponents of parental rights because we believe God entrusted children to parents to raise a child up in the way that he should go. So they think they got us here, and the reality is that they don't. Because there are a lot of things that we don't let parents do to children that's harmful for them. It's like this is why we don't let parents buy kids cigarettes. We don't let parents buy kids alcohol. We don't let them take kids to get tattoos, not till they're of age of majority or close to it. So this fits right in with that, because we know for a fact that these procedures are not helpful, as the research shows us, and they're actually harmful. You're helping a child try to stand against the way God created them, to make them into something he didn't make them into. They're already fearfully and wonderfully made, so anything that tries to alter that is harmful. The Word of God tells us that, and now all the science does too. Science is always just catching up to the Word of God, really. And the last thing I'll say about how that helps in the jurisprudence is that because Texas has a good court system, your Supreme Court's pretty reliable, it really helps elevate this issue in the court system around the country. We've seen a lot of other promising signs in the jurisprudence around some of these other laws around the country, but Texas having a good Supreme Court and these good rulings and being a state with the influence that it does really helps elevate this issue, because I'm pretty convinced the Supreme Court is going to have to rule on one of these laws, one of these suits eventually. And the better job Texas courts do on it, the faster that gets done.
Are you saying, let me get this straight, are you saying that God created them male and female? Is that what you're saying?
I know, I'm such a bigot, right?
My goodness. No, I thought it was interesting that they made that argument about parental freedom, parental rights, and then they also made an argument on equal protection, which I thought was interesting as well.
Yeah, that's another one they like to make, which is also really fallacious to me, just because an equal protection argument, what they're making is that they're trying to argue that the law targets a specific class of people, in this case, transgender children, so-called. But the law doesn't do that. The plain language of the law is obvious. No one can get these procedures under 18. Not trans kids, not black kids, not white kids. Nobody can get these procedures. They're under 18 years old. So it's also a fallacious argument. There's no way to make it. They try, but the judges that are really interpreting this well and making good rulings, whether they like it or not, they can't buy into this because the text of the bill just doesn't support it.
Representative Alderson, you have any insights on this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the insight we heard is very good, but I would just say a couple of things. Number one, I came into this in my floor debate on this, really trying to make three main points that I believe conclusively establishes why this law is constitutional. And that is that, number one, the literature shows that there's certainly, at the very least, you can say there is a question of whether or not this helps at all. There's a growing body of evidence that shows that it's harmful. The medical community, which is supposed to be the watchdog for making sure that we're not doing hurtful things to people, has completely abdicated and failed here in America its responsibility to police itself. And so the state of Texas absolutely has the authority to regulate the practice of medicine. And I just can't stress that enough. And it's one of those things where I know sometimes on other issues we may get a little crossways with the medical board, but the reality is that this law centers around the idea that the state has a compelling public health interest in making sure that people who put a shingle up that say that I'm here to help, not harm, that's actually a true statement. And so I believe that's 100% constitutional. And obviously there are things that we just simply don't allow because we know that they're harmful, even with parental consent. And I think one of the other things that we found along the way, which of course, the left really doesn't want you to know about, is that there's this growing group, and I'm sure you'll probably hear from some this weekend, of what we know as detransitioners. These are young people who got sucked into this deceptive philosophy based on human tradition, and unfortunately now are trying to get back to where they started, realizing that they can't, and they're horribly disfigured and they live with chronic pain and all of these other things. And so there are families, there are patients, there are parents out there who not only did medicine fail to self-regulate, but actively deceived them into thinking that this was going to cure their problems when in fact the literature never supported that. So I'm not a lawyer, but I think we wrote this law in a way where what the state's actually doing is well within its constitutional authority. And I will say one other thing, and that is the equal protection argument, that part of what the argument they're making is that there are a small percentage of children who are born with what we call intersex conditions. We might think of them, the colloquial term, as hermaphrodite, right? Where they have malformations, genetic or structural malformations of normal human development. That is a far cry. Repairing those defects, those abnormal things where something went wrong in the womb, that is a far cry from destroying healthy body tissues. And so I don't think that's an equal protection argument. I think you'd have to be pretty absurd to think that fixing a defect is the same as destroying something that's completely healthy.
I believe you addressed that in the text of the bill, didn't you?
I did, yes.
Yeah. Excellent.
We're actually going to hear, later on in this policy forum, I believe it's tomorrow, we're going to hear from Chloe Cole, who, as you know, went through that.
She's amazing.
Yeah,
and
Chloe
I
Cole
really
is
encourage
amazing.
all of you to hear her story.
You
It's
do
going to
not
make you
want
want
to
to cry.
That's right. You do not want to miss Chloe Cole's story on this and how she was sucked into this deceptive philosophy, and then she suffered all kinds of severe effects from this: infertility, lowering of her voice, different things. But now she's standing as a champion and a warrior for this issue. So we're very grateful for her and very grateful for her story as well. I pulled a couple of quotes. I thought this was interesting. I pulled a couple of quotes from the lawsuit filed against SB-14. A couple of things they said in their complaint. And you guys let me know if you agree with this, but one of the things they said was decades of clinical experience and a large body of research have demonstrated that these treatments are safe and effective at treating gender dysphoria in adolescents. Dr. Oliverson.
I'm going to say this, repeat after me. There are no high-quality studies demonstrating a benefit for these treatments in children. Not one. All of the studies that show a purported benefit, including, by the way, the one I talked about, which was the original study, had serious methodological design flaws. Sometimes the statistics are not executed well. Sometimes you do something in the middle of the study. In the case, I'll just give you one example. In the case of the original Dutch studies, they started out with drugs, and then phase 2 was they moved on to surgery, right? And so as a prerequisite for getting to phase 2, you had to complete phase 1. Every patient that got lost to follow-up during phase 1 was carved out of the sample entirely. All of the treatment failures were removed artificially from the sample. So when we say it worked 9 out of 10 times, realize that it was actually 20 plus people or maybe 100 people, and there was a large percentage that were lost to follow-up. We don't know what happened to them. Did they succumb to their mental illness and take their life? I hope not, but we don't know. Did they just decide, you know what, this is crazy. I'm comfortable with who I am and I'm gonna stop taking these crazy drugs? That's probably more likely. But those are some of the things that when they say that, you just have to understand, so just repeat after me, there are no high quality studies that show this is beneficial.
I think you said something to that effect in interviews recently as well.
I did.
So, Joseph, did you?
I was just going to add a lot of the, I was able to come for one day, one of your committee hearings and try to help advocate for the bill. And so much of the expert witness testimony hinged on all of this. The efficacy of the research and the reality that every systematic review of the evidence, at least so far, there's been about 5 of them, they're all overseas, has said there's no benefit to these for gender dysphoric children whatsoever. By the way, there's about 10 to 15 more of those coming out this year, and they should all go our way too. It's just the nature of a systematic review. So that's what also part of what made Dr. Oliverson the right sponsor for this, is he kept this issue, kept this debate focused on that science. And that kept so many other tertiary cultural issues out of it, despite some of our opponents' best efforts.
Well, we are coming up hard against time, and I wish we had more time to talk about this as well, because I think we could continue talking and covering some really beneficial topics on it. But I think you said this just recently, Dr. Oliverson. This was a team effort. This was something that everyone worked on together. We saw the grassroots come together on this and lead on this. And we couldn't, if we were a football team, you would have been the quarterback, but we had such a great team working on this together and pulling everyone from across the political spectrum. And it was just a wonderful outcome.
Absolutely, and I would just say in closing, 2 things. Number one, if it looked hard, it's because it was hard. And the reason it was hard is because we didn't compromise. We didn't, unlike other states, we didn't take any amendments to weaken this bill. There's no extreme protection risk thing where if 3 doctors say this kid really needs the treatment, they can have the treatment. There's no excuses, there's no workarounds, there's no fluff. We hung in there, we fought, and that's why we had to fight so hard, because we didn't compromise on this. We gave you a good law that protects kids and doesn't give any workarounds. And you all should pat yourselves on the back, because I'm going to tell you that the fact that, so we had Texas Values, we had TPPF, we had Alliance Defending Freedom, we had the Policy Alliance, we had the Manhattan Institute, we had the detransitioners, we had the parents, we had a collaboration of psychologists and doctors, and we actually brought the only pediatric endocrinologist to testify. They actually couldn't produce one, but we did. And instead of talking about the science, they wanted to attack his credentials and his humanity. But my point is just like you filled the gallery every single time this bill was heard. We had the lieutenant governor behind us. We had the speaker behind us. We had everybody, every Republican in the House and a handful of Democrats hung together on this. We shot down 12 consecutive bad amendments. We took not one of them. We never lost a vote. We fought it out and we won. And largely that is because you all showed up not once, not twice, but on 3 separate occasions, and the red shirts and the people supporting this bill outnumbered the other side 10-1 every single time this bill came up. So
That's right.
Give yourselves a round of applause.
I think we'll end on that note. And I think it's important to, as you just pointed out, realize that this actually was a bipartisan effort too. We got some Democratic votes on this bill as well. But you guys have been instrumental in everything that you've done for this legislation, both here in Texas, and I wish we'd had some time to talk, but you're on the National Association of Christian Lawmakers as well, and you're very active in their legislative committee, and you do great work not only here in Texas, but across the country. Joseph Combe, Dr. Tom Oliverson, let's give them a big hand for participating. Thank you guys.